just waiting here for a doctor's appointment. Yeah, I know. We spend a lot of time waiting. Doctor's appointments, checkout stand, and in God's waiting room. That's what we're going to look at today. Waiting for God. Sometimes it's no fun waiting for God. It can be pretty lonely. What we're going to look at today and look at why we need to wait on Him sometimes. So if you have your Bible, have a seat. Open up to Romans chapter 8, and then stick your finger in at Isaiah chapter 40. And, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just click on the subscribe button right up there, and then you'll see the little notification bell, and you can click on it to get notifications of whenever I post things to this channel. And if you've done that, just remember, before we're done, you might just learn something. So, let's get started. It's time for me to go back and see the doctor. Be with you in a minute. If you'll open to Romans chapter 8, that's where we'll spend some of the time this morning. Have you ever just stopped to think about how much of your life is spent waiting? How many of us this week maybe were at the doctor's office, restaurant, sitting, waiting for a phone call? And how much of that time do we think, I used to wear a watch, I don't anymore. I could be using this time more wisely. Doctor's offices are notorious for keeping us waiting. I had a doctor's appointment once at 10 a.m. At 11, I was taken into an exam room, and at noon, the doctor finally got there. Yeah, I would like to have been able to send her a bill for that period of time that I was waiting. But how many of us have had to wait, for instance, while you're looking for a job? They've been unemployed for a long period of time? Or how about this one? Over here waiting for the perfect man, over here waiting for the perfect woman. And then this one. People I've known who are really waiting to try and change their spouse, the one they're married to. Yeah, good luck with that. It seems to come up a lot with Christians who are getting married and the person they're marrying is not a Christian. Oh, don't worry, I'm going to change him. It's usually a non-Christian woman a Christian woman marrying a non-Christian man, although it has gone the other way too. But don't worry, they'll change after we're married. Famous last words, yeah. But a lot of things that we do wait for. There are many situations where we find ourselves waiting. And when it comes to God, it's no different. We find ourselves in what I call God's waiting room. And there are times when God, it's like our parent, where He'll, say, okay, you wait here while I'm working some things out in your life. And you remember when you were kids, or maybe you did this with your own kids, where you're out in the car and Dad says, well, I need to go by this office or by this person's house, and I need to pick something up. We'll just be a minute. And Dad would pull in and say, wait here, I'll be back. I'll just be a minute. Okay, 45 minutes later, I'm still sitting in the car. Or I'm still sitting in the lobby or the waiting room while he's in it. And I can, if I'm inside with him, I can hear him talking. They're not talking about anything of importance. They're just talking shop. They're talking hobbies, whatever. And then, something is coming up like, I got to go to the bathroom and Dad's still in there or something. And I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. And sometimes with God, it can feel the same way, except instead of waiting a half hour, 45 minutes, maybe I've been waiting for a half hour, 45 minutes, 20 years, 20 days, 20 weeks, 20 months, something like that. Like people in the Bible have had to wait. How long did Moses, for instance, waited 40 years taking care of sheep, waited 40 years in the wilderness? And how long was Job going through all of his, losing his kids and losing his animals and sitting there with his friends? He was there for a while. No, I don't think we know really how long, but he was there for a while. But waiting on the Lord is going to be a fact of life. Waiting in restaurants is a fact of life. Waiting in the doctor's office. We wait a lot, don't we? Now, in a restaurant, I've got options. If I think they're taking too long, I can always take my business elsewhere. If I go into any business and the customer service is not up to what I think it should be, I can walk out. But what do I do when God's not doing what I think God should be doing? Where am I going to go? Options are a little bit limited in that case, aren't they? But here's one of the passages that talks about waiting on the Lord. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. See, waiting on the Lord is a fact of life. The psalmist said, "Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart." Wait, I say, on the Lord. Notice he says it twice right here in this psalm. And in those days, they didn't have the punctuation that we have, like exclamation points and that kind of thing. So typically, if there was something important they wanted you to note, they would repeat it several times in short order. Here we go, another psalm that says, "Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man who carries out wicked schemes." And to me, waiting on the Lord is sometimes something I'm not very good at. Don't know about you. But I want us to look at last week we started looking at promises of God, and I want us to look at today what it means to wait on the Lord and some of what comes with that. And spending time in God's waiting room, we're going to see, is just an undeniable truth of life. Sometimes we just have to wait on the Lord. And the thing we've kind of grown up in the last several years with, accustomed to Hollywood, where they can take an event or something that was days and months over time, they condense it to just a few minutes. Real life doesn't condense that way. They can do a movie about an airline flight going, say, from New York to Paris. I remember watching a movie. It was filmed back in the days when prop-driven planes. New York to Paris was 18 hours. Now, the film was not 18 hours long. They condensed it to just a few minutes. But if I had to really sit there for 18 hours crossing the Atlantic, well, I'm going to have to be patient. But for some, God's waiting room is going to mean any number of things that might come up in it. Number one is a time of transition. This is where, I'm not real sure what God's doing. Or maybe I do know, maybe it is a move, maybe it's changing jobs or something. And it's just, I have to be patient with the Lord for things to fall into place so that we can do it. Or how about a life-altering event or a tragedy? It could be a good life-altering event. It could be another tragedy, like the sudden or unexpected death of a spouse. I have a friend who this week, he and his wife were married, I think right around 40 years. She had been dealing with cancer on and off, and this week they put out on Facebook that her cancer, they had to call in hospice. It had reached that point. And then it was the next morning, I got a text from Debbie saying that she had passed away in the night, and we were expecting it to be a little bit longer. But that is a life-altering event. That is a tragic one. It could be a good life-altering event. Maybe you finally got that promotion you wanted. Maybe you're going to buy that dream house that you wanted, and that's a good one. And you're going to be able to move into it. Those are life-altering events, but they're also stressful. And those are ones where things start happening fast and furious, and that's where you really have to lean on the Lord. There's maybe a wake-up call to a life change. Could be something waiting on the Lord where finally that alcoholic husband or wife has gotten the wake-up call. They need to get their sobriety. And now we start that process. Or what about seasons of rest, times of refinement, and then any other moment in God's waiting room where things are going to be changing in our situations. Or we're just not sure what the Lord's going to do. Romans chapter 8 tells us, we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. Notice it says all things work together for good. It does not say all things are good. It does not say all things are just going to work out good. It does not say good comes from everything. That's 3 or 4 different ways you can misquote this passage and misapply it. But everything, good or bad, is going to work together for, as verse 29 is going to say, we'll see in just a minute, because God is using all the things in our life to ultimately work to His ultimate glory. So anything good or bad, heartache, uplifting thing can be used redemptively. It can be used to turn us in the direction that God wants us to go. It can be a good thing that causes us to go in that direction. It could be something that's bad. But no matter what gets thrown at us, what Paul wants us to understand is we can still trust God, because all things will work together. Now here's verse 29. For whom He foreknew, because you have to take 29 in context with 28, otherwise 28 really doesn't make any sense. For whom He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren. Here is God's end game, for us to be conformed to the image of His Son. So God can take anything, hurts, sufferings, good things, bad things, and He can use them to better us and to mold us. And that's what He wants us to be. He wants us to be more like Jesus. Now, so you have to stop and think, was everything for Jesus smooth sailing? No. Didn't they more than once try to stone Him? Wasn't there a time He cast a bunch of demons out of a man, then they went and caused a herd of swine to go over a cliff, and they came out and said, Jesus, we'd really prefer if you move on. Not everybody accepted Him. Not everybody looked to Him kindly. And so it seems that God does His best work for us, though, in and through our times of adversity, doesn't He? Who are the teachers you tend to remember from school? Aren't they the ones that drove you the hardest? What are the lessons that we tend to learn from life the longest? Aren't they the ones that usually we learn the hardest? Doesn't mean it was pleasant or that we enjoyed it, but maybe we learned a lesson, for instance, when we rushed into buying that house, that first house, or that first car, or any other big commitment that we made, or so maybe something that wasn't necessarily a big commitment, but we decided on the spur of the moment to do something, and then it turned into a disaster. And we've learned those kinds of lessons. God seems to do His best work when we are hit with adversity. That's when we have consequences we deal with. Remember, consequences can be good or it can be bad. For instance, you go and you buy that new car. What's the guarantee? You go in there and you sign on the dotted line for the next 5 years. You're going to pay $500 a month for a $30,000 car that with interest will probably be about $40,000 or so that you're going to pay. In the end, what guarantee do you have that that car is going to last all that time? Well, the answer is you don't. But I got a warranty. Yeah, okay, you got a warranty. Now, if that car happens to get flooded out in the next hurricane, warranty's probably not going to do you much good. If that car happens to hit a tree while you're going down the road and you maybe go off trying to avoid hitting a person or a dog or something, it's all on faith that you're doing. Everything we do with the future is on faith, because we don't know if it's going to make it or not. So Romans 8:20, notice all things work together. Let that sink in for just a minute. All things are going to work together, no matter where I think I should be, no matter what job I think I should have, no matter what house I think I should have. God is going to cause all things to work together. He's going to take my situation, make all things work together for the good for those who love God, so that I will eventually be conformed to the image of His Son. And when we're sitting here in God's waiting room, it can be a tough place, it can be a lonely place, it can be a confusing place. Particularly if you're trying to explain to people who don't have any concept of what you're dealing with. Particularly, for instance, I obviously have never lost a spouse. I have someone who's maybe just lost their spouse. They can talk to me and explain to me. I'll do my best to understand it, but I haven't experienced that. I've experienced loss of a job. I've experienced getting a car that I really liked. There's a lot of things I have experienced that I can relate to, but there's a lot of things in life that I can't relate to, particularly if I'm trying to explain to a non-Christian why I'm handling it differently than they would. Because a lot of people who aren't Christians would never get it. But even then, we have to remember God is still God. He can see things that I can't see. He knows what His end game, what His purpose is. He knows other events that are coming into play that I don't know. I have to remember that, which means that being in God's waiting room is really going to require a lot of faith. Now think about in a hospital waiting room. If you're sitting there waiting while they're taking your spouse or your parent or your child back in for an emergency surgery or some kind of emergency procedure, and right now they're not letting you go back there, and you're out here pacing back and forth in the waiting room. Or maybe it's a regular scheduled operation. It's taking a lot of faith, isn't it? A lot of worries that go into it. But being in God's waiting room is a necessity for our growth. There are things we just have to go through in order to grow. But God has said He's going to stay there with us through it all. We've got those promises that He's going to be right there with us. And at the outset, I've got to state the obvious that this is going to be tough sometimes. And James chapter 1, notice he says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." Count it all joy when you fall into various trials. Now, how am I supposed to do that? How am I supposed to count it as joy? Remember, joy and happiness are not the same thing. But notice we need the down times in life in order to make us stronger. Keep in mind, too, that those down times can also help us to appreciate the up times better. I mean, how am I going to know what it's like, as Paul said, paraphrasing Paul, how am I going to know what it's like to have plenty to eat if I don't have periods where I don't have food to eat? Or something maybe a little more practical for us. For those who like the warmer weather, how do we really enjoy the warmer weather and appreciate it if we don't occasionally have to go through the cold weather? Or if you're the opposite, you like the colder weather, you like the cooler temperature, but the hot temperature, doesn't it make you appreciate it more? And that sometimes is going through the rough times can give us an appreciation for the good times. And that's the trick, is using them for our good. The trick is learning from them and not necessarily trying to avoid them. That's going to be the trick. So James says we face trials of many kinds, and this can refer to two things. One is the types of trials that we face. How many of us have health issues that we deal with? Or we've got money issues, or in my case, lack of money issues many times we have to deal with. How many of us have got issues with just the maintenance and physical issues of our homes, our cars, our jobs? Those are all various sources of trials. And then another thing he might be referring to are the source of trials. In other words, I might be getting a trial just because of my Christian faith, kind of like we were talking about earlier, being persecuted or ridiculed for my faith. That's one way. Or maybe a trial is coming just from life in general. Whether you're a Christian or you're not a Christian, there are going to be times when the car doesn't run quite like it does, or when you're going to have health issues, or when you're going to have challenges from that are work-related, trying to meet a sales quota, or trying to get an assignment done. Those are all going to be sources of trials. Those are all going to be types of trials that everybody you notice is going to have to face them. Not just Christians always, but non-Christians might face some of the same kind of trials. And James tells us a lot of truths about sitting there in God's waiting room. And remember, James is one that also talks about patience and being patient, how patience has to have their perfect work. That's why I really don't like to pray for patience, because then usually some kind of trial would happen. I got to exercise my patience. I kind of had enough of that. But there is no magic wand that patient person without having to go through and use them. I want you to consider Matthew chapter 8, the centurion that came to Jesus with a sick servant and asked Jesus to heal him. And then he says, "Lord, I do not deserve you to come into my room, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed." Whoa. I think Luke's account says that Jesus marveled, because somebody's getting it. Somebody's understanding what Jesus is all about. And this is a real statement of faith. He's understanding Jesus' authority in all things. He's putting his faith there in Jesus. And notice who this is that's making this profession of faith. It's a Roman. It's a Gentile. A non-Jew. And the Jews seem to not be getting it. And what about us? Can we show that, yeah, we get it, that I've got to have that kind of faith like he had in Jesus, and let God, and know that God has got everything under control. The Jews then, even Jesus' disciples, remember, had a hard time accepting and understanding. Remember, after he was crucified, they were in hiding because they thought he was dead. That's it. Didn't seem to catch on or click in their head about the resurrection that was coming. So you've got this non-Jew. He's not a member of God's people, but he's showing this faith in God. And when we forget to call on God, that is going to lead to a crisis of faith many times. Many times when we do have a problem, the last thing we tend to think about is is calling on God. And then we forget, okay, let me pray about this, let me turn this over to God, and then let me step back and let God deal with it. Yeah, but now that means I'm not in control anymore. Yeah, that's what it means. We humans like to be in control. And despite God being big and powerful, we sometimes just forget or we neglect that God can take care of these situations. Going back to Matthew 8, Jesus uses that moment to remind us that this kind of faith separates true disciples from the rest. This is going to separate us if we are willing to step back and allow God to just take control. And I don't know about you, but if I'm going somewhere, a lot of times I like to be in that driver's seat. I just like to have the control of the vehicle. And this is where God is saying, no, move over and let me sit in the driver's seat. God is my co-pilot. Well, then you're in the wrong seat. You need to move over to the co-pilot seat and let God be the pilot. Because of this Roman officer, because of his faith in Jesus' authority, Jesus just spoke a word and he was healed. And a crisis of faith can come, though, when I forget who has control over everything. You know, the world's getting more and more chaotic. We're seeing a lot of people who profess Christian faiths getting into a lot of legal entanglements, but the one thing we have to remember is God is still on the throne. God is still in control. While I'm sitting down here waiting for God to make a move in a given area or to do something, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I've got to remember that He is still in control of events. He is still the one that's guiding and directing things. And when this comes about because of our circumstances, I need to profess that God has authority over all things, and I need to keep that in mind, and I need to put it into action. And those who wait on the Lord are going to see God's faithfulness. Those are the ones that are really going to see what it means to have God's promises. Because one principle we need to understand early on is God is faithful. So one of the things we have to understand about God is His faithfulness. Now, in our own minds, we think, okay, God, you need to do this, this, and this for this situation to turn out right. Well, how do we know that? If God is faithful in this situation, He will do X. Well, maybe God's got other plans. But God is going to cause all things to work together, remember. And we need to be wrapped up, or rather not get so wrapped up in our present struggles. And when I say we, I'm including me in this, because, you know, preachers, we do have same that you have. Elders do too, deacons do too. I have known preachers, elders, and deacons over the years that have lost their faith, gotten themselves into all kinds of problems because they walked away from their Christian faith. So it does not make us exempt. Just like doctors who do a lot of things that are not healthy lifestyle-wise, it happens. And so in Isaiah chapter 40, mark this passage if you haven't got it already. He says, "Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my just claim is passed over by my God? Have you not known, have you not heard, the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, neither faints nor is weary? His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the weak, and to those who have no might, He increases strength. Even the youth shall faint and be weary, and the young man shall utterly fall." So it doesn't matter how young you are, how tough you think you are, you're still at times going to be weary. You still at times are going to faint. And here's how he concludes it. That those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Notice he says those who wait on the Lord. How long do I have to wait on the Lord? Well, that's a good question. Maybe days, weeks, months. How long did Paul and Silas have to wait for the Lord to make a move there? Well, just probably a couple of hours there in that Philippian jail before they had a chance to get loose and they're able to convert the Philippian jailer. But then how long did Israel have to wander in the wilderness before they were able to go into the promised land? Well, that was a lot longer. Even those in the prime of life are going to stumble and fall. Those in the prime of life are going to need picking up. That's what Isaiah is telling us there. He's telling us that those who are in the prime of life are not exempt from stumbling and falling. They grow tired, they grow weary. Even the strongest among us eventually falters. And people in the Bible who had to wait on God, they include, but are not limited to, Daniel. I wonder how long, here he is in the lion's den. I wonder if that night seemed a little bit longer to him. Just like when we're Best thing I can think of that I've ever had to deal with it's at night and there's a storm, there's tornado warnings, there's high winds, and I've got a cottage full of girls. At Child Haven this happened once. We had tornado warnings out, and the nights felt a lot longer that night when we were trying to keep them calm and just keep an eye on things while we went through this storm. And then what about Paul? Going through a storm. You ever been in a storm at sea? It can make it very long, or feel very long, before he ended up on Malta in a shipwreck. Again, going back to Isaiah 40, it's a reminder that it turned out fine then, so why are we doubting now? You know, God got me through the situation over here. Okay, yeah, and he got me through this other one. Why all of a sudden am I doubting? Why all of a sudden am I trying to take things into my own hands and move things faster and harder than what God would have me to do? Remember, God's ways are not our ways, and that's a tough one for us to grasp sometimes. God is the authority. If we trust God to be faithful, then we need to recognize his authority. God's in control. So which means we need to let it go. Notice he says in Psalms to cast your burden upon the Lord and he will sustain you. That is for flinging or throwing something like a hot potato. I'm throwing something to you, throwing it hard to you. That's the way it is with God when he says cast your burdens on the Lord. Throw it to him. And if I'm throwing it to you and you're across the room, I don't have it in my hand anymore. If I take this remote and throw it across to you, it's not in my hand anymore. So now you've got to try and catch it. God will catch it and God will take care of it. That's how we get rid of our burdens when they're hitting us. And that's how we're going to find peace. That's how we're going to feel a load lifted off us if we actually give it to the Lord. And then you will also see the blessings of God in your life. Notice Psalm 65. Blessed is the man you choose and cause to approach you, that he may dwell in your courts. We shall be satisfied with the goodness of your house, of your holy temple. Those are the blessings that we can see if we will be patient, let God have his work, let God have his way. Psalm 65, by awesome deeds in righteousness you will answer us, O God of our salvation, you who are the confidence of the earth and the ends of the earth and of the far-off seas. And then we also have to acknowledge God's authority. Truly my soul silently waits for God. From him comes my salvation. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be greatly moved. There's a song, I shall not be moved, that's based on this line. And notice he says, truly my soul silently waits for God. Sometimes I'm not that silent when I'm waiting on God. Sometimes I'm going to get pretty loud. If I'm by myself in prayer, I'll get pretty loud with God. Sometimes I do pray out loud. God, come on, what's going on? What's the holdup? And God sometimes down there is, yeah, you just wait and watch this. Remember God's authority. Remember we have to sometimes just wait on the Lord. Remember, too, to acknowledge God, that no matter what's going on through all this, through whatever you're waiting on, that God is still God. Faith is not always easy. Because we don't know how tomorrow, from our vantage point, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow from one minute to the next. We don't know how things are going to turn out. This is where we have to remember that it's not always easy. Remember, God's using all things for our good, even when it seems like nothing is being done. Even when it seems like everything's at a standstill. While I'm waiting for my loved one to come out of that operating room, while I'm waiting for this storm to pass so I can try and get a little bit of rest tonight, we don't know what God is doing behind the scenes. And so when we look at Romans 8:28 and 29, we know all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. For whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. To be conformed to the image of his Son. That's what God's wanting. We may feel like we're waiting for God to do something with our finances or something in our marriage, something within relationships. God, come on, why isn't something being done? And God's saying, wait. You just sit right over here and wait. And let me handle this. just like our parents would do to us, or we might do with our kids. Regardless of all these things, God is doing something. We just have to remember, because we can't see it doesn't mean there's nothing going on. And remember to allow God to work. I've got a couple of questions there in the end of the outline there to think about and to ask yourself and to think about when you're waiting for God, when you're questioning, when you're wondering, and when the world seems to be shaking around us. Take time to truly, silently sit and wait on the Lord. Give God time, give God room to work. We don't know what tomorrow brings, but we just have to wait on the Lord. Frustrating sometimes? Yes. Waiting in God's waiting room can be very frustrating. But yet waiting for Him and His timing will be the better decision to make than to try and go off on our own. So this morning, are you waiting on the Lord? Do you need prayers while you're waiting? Prayers for patience, maybe? If there's something there we can help you with, why not let us know as together we stand and as we sing.
Let's go ahead and stand and open your Bibles to the front cover.
Thanks for watching this lesson, and here's a heads up for you. Next week's lesson will be out of James chapter 4 and drawing near to God. And another cheap shameless plug, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel by hitting the subscribe button right up there. And then when it appears, click on the notification button so you can stay up to date with postings on my channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.